Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey through one of the sleepiest aspects of medieval life, how knights trained for battle. Sure, Hollywood shows them charging across muddy fields in shining armor, swords clashing dramatically, and heroic music swelling in the background. But the truth? Let's just say, you probably won't survive this, because of boredom, not battle wounds. You're in the dim light of a stone chamber now, somewhere in a minor noble's keep. You shuffle your feet awkwardly as a wrinkled tailor circles you with a measuring cord. The fabric of your tunic itches. The air smells faintly of beeswax and old leather, and you're sweating, not from nerves, but from standing still for so long. Welcome to your first armor fitting. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're here, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've been chosen to become a knight, which means endless fittings. Contrary to what you might think, armor isn't a one-size-fits-all affair. Each piece, from the greaves on your shins to the breastplate and pauldrons protecting your shoulders, must be tailored to your exact measurements. 1 inch off, and you risk pinching yourself during a turn or exposing a gap during battle. So, you stand there while your arm is lifted and lowered. Again and again. Historians still argue whether early knights wore armor primarily for protection or prestige, but no one disputes how painfully slow the whole process was. First, there's the mail, a woven mesh of iron rings. It's heavy, it smells like rust and sweat, and putting it on feels like wrestling with a metal octopus. It takes 2 servants and about 20 minutes just to get you laced up properly, and that's before the plate armor even starts. You shift uncomfortably as the armorer tightens a leather strap beneath your left armpit. It creaks as it's pulled taut. You try to imagine charging into battle like this, but honestly, you feel more like a wrapped roast. Let's talk helmets. Your head is carefully measured because if your helmet doesn't fit perfectly, you might as well not wear one. Too loose, and it slips over your eyes at the worst possible moment. Too tight, and you can't breathe. Or worse, it gives you a splitting headache before you even leave the castle. Some early helmets even came with built-in ventilation slits and pivoting visors, but these were often more trouble than they were worth. One knight famously removed his visor mid-battle to scratch his nose, and promptly lost the nose. The padding beneath the metal is called a gambeson. Imagine wearing a quilt stuffed with horsehair. It's hot. It smells. It makes you look like an overcooked pastry. But without it, that fancy armor would grind your bones into a fine powder by lunchtime. Now here's something a bit more unexpected. Some armor fittings included tests, slightly dramatic but very real ones. The smith would don his finest serious face, raise a small mallet, and give the chest plate a good thwack. If you didn't flinch, good. If the armor dented, not so good. If both happened, well, back to the forge. And just so you know, adjusting armor wasn't a one-and-done deal. As you grew stronger, or thicker around the waist, thanks to all the mead and mutton, your gear needed tweaking. Think of it like medieval tailoring. Come back every season for your fittings and upgrades. Version 2.0 had fewer shoulder pinches and marginally better groin protection. Even getting onto a horse in full armor required help. In training, you'd be hoisted like a sack of potatoes by 2 squires. A knight once famously tried to mount his steed without aid and fell backwards with a metallic thunk that startled an entire chicken coop. The hens never laid eggs again, or so the story goes. Despite all this, you must stand still. Again. Because the tailor wants to double-check your elbow angle. You twitch slightly, and he sighs. You begin to understand why so many aspiring knights quietly reconsidered the priesthood instead. Still, there's something oddly calming about the rhythm of the process. The clang of metal tools, the soft murmur of cloth being measured, the faint smell of oil rubbed into the joints of a gauntlet. You're not in battle yet. You're just waiting, preparing, breathing in the slow, repetitive ritual of becoming something more than a page, not yet a warrior, just a well-measured bundle of potential. Some scholars debate whether the extensive fittings served a psychological purpose as well, training patience, humility, and awareness of one's body before ever lifting a blade. After all, to fight like a knight, you first had to feel like one, even if that feeling included a chafing seam and a helmet that smelled like boiled wool. By the end of the day, you were exhausted. And not from battle, but from standing still, holding your arms out like a scarecrow, trying not to flinch every time something metallic touches you. You're almost longing for sword practice. Almost. You wake before dawn to the sound of a rooster who clearly takes his job too seriously. Your arms are still a little sore from yesterday's fitting session, and you briefly consider hiding under the rough wool blanket. But no, today is sword practice. Again. You pull on your training tunic, made of coarse linen that scratches in all the wrong places, and you make your way to the courtyard, where mist clings to the ground like it hasn't quite decided whether to rise or go back to bed. You envy it. Waiting for you is a wooden training sword, heavier than a real blade, ironically, designed to build muscle and remind you that even swinging a sword wrong could leave a bruise. Your trainer is already there. He's old, grumpy, and his beard has bits of bread in it from breakfast. He hands you the practice sword with a grunt that somehow means, "Good morning. Try harder, and don't embarrass me all at once." And so begins the repetition. You swing, you reset, you swing again. Not at an opponent, mind you, at a straw dummy who has seen more heroic charges than any real soldier. The poor thing leans slightly to one side, missing an arm. You wonder if it's judging you. Probably. Historians still argue whether training dummies were meant purely for muscle memory, or if they symbolize something deeper, an early psychological conditioning tool to reduce hesitation. All you know is, you've struck it about 400 times, and its expression hasn't changed. Next comes footwork. You walk a square, then a circle, then a figure 8, then the square again. It's less about flair and more about staying balanced, learning when to plant your foot and when to pivot. There's nothing cinematic here, just dusty boots, squelching slightly on dew-slicked ground, and your own breathing. Now, sparring. You're paired with another trainee, a lanky boy who always smells faintly of onions. You bow stiffly to each other before raising your swords. Then, the game begins. Tap, parry, step back, repeat. It's all choreographed. Real sword fights were quick, ugly, and chaotic. But here, every move is controlled. Safe, a little boring. Okay, a lot boring. Still, there's comfort in the rhythm. Tap, parry, step, tap, parry, step. The clang of wood meeting wood is sharp at first, but over time it blends into the background like raindrops on a window. Your instructor mutters corrections from behind his beard. "Lower your shoulder," he growls. "Don't lean in like that. You want to die with style, boy." You take it in stride. Or you try. And after what feels like the length of a small crusade, you get a break. You flop down on a bench next to a barrel of water, dip your hands in, and let the coolness soak into your bones. A quirky tidbit? Some knights named their swords. Not for glory, but out of boredom. When you spend half your life training with a chunk of metal, you get a little attached. One knight named his blade Buttercup. Another chose Elspeth the Unruly. You're considering Gertrude, if only because it's fun to say when you miss a swing. As the sun climbs higher, you return to drills, this time working on disarms. Your opponent tries to twist the sword from your grip, and you retaliate by stomping his foot. Accidentally, mostly. He squeaks and hops around, and your trainer sighs again, the way only someone who's seen this exact mishap 200 times can sigh. By early afternoon, the courtyard is filled with the thud of boots, the grunts of overworked teenagers, and the occasional cry of, "Ow!" followed by a sheepish, "Sorry." Everyone's a little bruised, a little sunburned, and very, very sweaty. Now, to be clear, this wasn't just physical training. Swordsmanship was a lifelong study. Knights often carried manuals filled with stylized images of duel techniques. Some of them even had poetic little names like the Wrath Guard or the Fool's Guard. Historians still debate whether these were practical or just knightly flair. Probably a bit of both. The final part of today's session is slow drills. You and your onion-scented partner move through patterns like dancers in an extremely clunky ballet. Forward, strike, turn, step. Your muscles ache, but your mind begins to wander. You imagine a real battle, your sword slicing through the air, crowds cheering. But mostly, you imagine a nap. Your trainer finally calls an end, and you sink to the ground like a sack of flour, drenched in sweat, arms jelly. You've swung that sword more times than you've blinked today, and tomorrow you'll do it all again. And the next day. Still, there's something soothing about knowing exactly what each day brings. Swing, parry, breathe, repeat. The world is uncertain. Training is not. You trudge back toward the keep, your sword dragging behind you, and the sun casts long shadows across the training ground. You're tired, sore, and slightly embarrassed about naming your sword Gertrude. But you're one day closer to becoming a knight. A very sleepy, bruised, and probably limping knight. You wake to the sound of hooves. Today is not sword day, nor is it lance or etiquette day. Today, you ride. You shuffle out of the barracks and into the early morning light, where the horses are already being saddled by sleepy squires who've probably been up for hours. You're assigned a sturdy bay mare with judgmental eyes. Her name is Tulip, which you find a little too delicate for a creature capable of knocking you unconscious with a flick of her neck. The saddle is stiff, the reins smell of old leather, and mounting a horse in full gear is, as always, a dignified disaster. One boot in the stirrup, a hop, and whoops, you land in the dirt again. The squire politely pretends not to notice. Historians still argue whether mounted training began with balance or obedience drills, but either way, your day starts with a trot. Not a gallop, mind you. A trot. A jostling, knee-rattling, rhythm-disrupting trot that makes your teeth chatter and your confidence crumble. The instructor calls out commands from atop a suspiciously well-behaved stallion. "Post!" he shouts. "Stand in your stirrups! Again!" You try, but your thighs scream in protest. Posting at a trot might not seem like a skill of war, but try doing it for an hour in chainmail and then say that again. Now, to mounted combat. Your trusty wooden lance, about the length of a fishing pole but heavier and far less cooperative, is placed into your grip. You lower it awkwardly, aiming for a ring the size of a donut suspended from a pole. Miss again. Again. Thunk. Hit the pole instead. Tulip snorts like she's embarrassed for you. You sigh. A fringe detail most folks don't know. Training lances were often tipped with soft leather or dull wood, but that didn't stop them from smacking you in the face if you missed your aim and overcompensated. There's a reason so many early knights had bent noses and bruised egos. You circle back around, try again, and clink. You thread the ring. A small victory, but no one cheers. This isn't a tournament. This is Tuesday. Next comes mock charges. You line up with 3 other trainees. The instructor waves a flag. You kick your heels into Tulip's sides, and she lurches forward like she's just remembered she doesn't like you. The world blurs into thudding hooves, whipping wind, and your visor rattling like a bucket of rocks. You aim your lance at the stuffed target ahead. It spins lazily on its post, arms outstretched like a scarecrow having a bad day. You hit it square in the chest, and its arm flings around, smacking you on the shoulder. The others laugh, but kindly. Everyone's been whacked by the spinny man at least once. Historians still debate the effectiveness of these quintins as training devices. Some claim they taught precision. Others think they were just elaborate stress toys for nobles with too much free time. Either way, it's surprisingly hard to hit one and not get smacked in return. Lunch is a quick affair. Dried meat, hard bread, and a few sips of tepid ale. Then it's back to drills. You practice turning at full speed, drawing your sword mid-gallop, and picking up small sacks from the ground without falling off. You don't succeed at that last one. In fact, you end up sliding sideways off Tulip and landing in a pile of old hay. You remain there for a moment, face down, rethinking your life choices. Your instructor helps you up with a sigh and a slap on the back that feels just a bit too cheerful. "Better luck tomorrow," he says. You think he means it. Later, there's a group ride across a nearby meadow. This part is more peaceful. The horses settle into a steady pace, and the breeze tugs at your tunic. The sky is wide and blue, dotted with lazy clouds. You pass a stream, its waters glittering in the sun, and for a moment, it doesn't feel like training. It feels like something softer, calmer. One of the older trainees rides beside you. "Did you know," he says casually, "that knights used to stuff their boots with moss for padding?" You didn't. You also didn't know moss could be that absorbent. The things you learn between bruises. As the sun begins to dip, you guide Tulip back toward the stables. You dismount with a little more grace, only a little, and give her a grateful pat on the neck. She doesn't bite you this time. Progress. You're sore in strange places. Your thighs feel like boiled turnips. But you're standing, and tomorrow you'll ride again. Maybe this time you'll pick up the sack. Maybe not. You rise with a grunt. Everything hurts. Your thighs feel like you spent the night wrestling an anvil, and your shoulders ache in that dull, persistent way that suggests you'll soon develop muscles you never wanted. Today, mercifully, is not Horseback Day. Today is Food Day. No, not the kind of food day where you sit around feasting on roasted game and buttery pies. That's for after the battles, assuming you survive. This is the kind of food day where you learn what a knight in training actually eats. And it's about as exciting as a rock. You file into the hall with the others, past long wooden tables still sticky with last night's stew. Breakfast? Barley porridge. Again. It's gray. It jiggles slightly. And someone has tried to make it festive by adding 2 lonely raisins. You stir it with a wooden spoon and pretend not to notice it staring back. Historians still argue whether the diets of medieval knights were actually balanced or woefully inadequate. Some say they ate heartily: meats, cheese, bread, beer. Others claim many meals were bland, repetitive, and chosen more for function than flavor. Either way, one thing is certain: you will not be writing home about this porridge. After breakfast comes the training diet lecture, courtesy of a man whose beard has more presence than his voice. He speaks softly, as if afraid of waking the food. You learn about proteins from fish, fats from nuts, and the miracle of cabbage, which apparently solves every digestive problem known to man. Someone coughs politely, someone else snores. The cabbage does not comment. Lunch is more exciting, if only because it involves chewing. There's bread, a dense, chewy slab that could be used to patch a castle wall. There's cheese, just shy of turning. And for the lucky, a piece of salted beef that requires a full jaw workout. It's said some squires built their biting strength this way. You believe it. Here's a quirky tidbit. Medieval folks believed heavily spiced food made you stronger. Not just metaphorically, physically. Knights would sometimes add mustard or vinegar to meals, thinking it would warm the blood and prepare the body for action. You try a dab of mustard on your bread. It tastes like a dare. You eat it anyway. Afternoons are for physical digestion, by which you mean more exercise. The logic, apparently, is to train right after eating to prepare your body for the chaos of war. You suspect the true reason is that no one wants you lounging around digesting when there are sandbags to carry. You and the others head outside for strength training. This doesn't involve dumbbells or gyms, just sacks of grain, wooden beams, and rocks. So many rocks. You lift them. You walk with them. You lift them again. It's like being trapped in a medieval gym run by a sadistic farmer. "Again!" your instructor shouts. You groan and hoist another sack. You imagine your future self thanking you, though he's probably still chewing that beef from lunch. Then comes a hydration break. Water is ladled from a wooden bucket, and it tastes faintly of moss and mystery. You drink it anyway. At least it's wet. One of your peers grins, revealing a chipped tooth. "My uncle said knights used to drink wine before battle," he says. "Said it steadied the nerves." Another trainee shakes his head. "No, it made him woozy. My aunt swore by garlic instead." Historians still debate the truth, of course. The line between courage and indigestion was thin. Dinner is more of the same: stew that may or may not contain meat, thick slices of bread, and small apples that look like they've had a long life. You eat it all. Hunger is the best spice, as they say, and also the only one on offer tonight. There's a peculiar comfort in the repetition. Food arrives at the same time, tastes the same, fills the same hole. You start to appreciate the quiet ritual of it, passing the bread, ladling the stew, nodding politely to the person who always eats with his mouth open. And despite the blandness, you begin to notice the effects. Your arms are thicker, your legs feel sturdier, you sleep deeper. The porridge may be a moral offense, but it's turning you into something solid, something knight-shaped. Before bed, a senior knight walks by and eyes your plate. "Eat like a warrior," he mutters, "not like a poet." You're not sure what that means, but you nod and finish your cabbage. That night, you lie on your straw mattress and think about raisins. There were 2 this morning. Maybe there'll be 3 tomorrow. A feast by medieval standards. Sleep doesn't come easily tonight, not because of nightmares, but because straw mattresses don't care about your dreams. You shift. You itch. You finally doze off just in time to hear the morning bell clang. Today is about sleep, ironically. Specifically, how knights were expected to sleep, and why it rarely felt like rest. You rise, rubbing the ache from your back, and join the others in the chapel-like stillness of the early morning. There are no roosters today, only the slow creak of the keep waking up. Someone sneezes 3 times in a row. He's now known as Sir Sneezes. You stretch slowly and head to the small barracks yard where the routine begins. Morning inspection, cold water to the face, and a breakfast of guess what porridge. You're getting used to the texture, still not the taste. Then comes today's training, preparing for night watch. Yes, part of a knight's life, especially in campaigns or sieges, involved long nights spent guarding walls, monitoring fires, or simply waiting. And part of training to be a knight was learning how to sleep just enough, just right, and just when you could. You're led to the upper ramparts of the keep, where the instructor explains tonight's drill. 4 hours of watch, followed by 4 hours of rest, then back to training. You begin to understand why knights aged like bad cheese. Historians still argue whether sleep deprivation was a tactic of discipline or just an unfortunate consequence of warfare. Either way, you're feeling it already. During your first hour of watch, you stand quietly on the cold stone, torchlight flickering around you. The wind howls through the arrow slits, and somewhere in the distance an owl disapproves of your posture. You try to stay alert, but your eyes keep drifting toward the moon. By the second hour, your mind starts to wander. You imagine a small bed with linen sheets. You've never actually seen linen sheets, but you've heard rumors. You picture feasting in bed, wrapped in softness, with no one shouting again in your direction. You're jerked back to reality by a squire dropping a pail below. The clang echoes through the keep. You flinch. Tulip the horse probably flinched too wherever she's sleeping, probably on moss. At the third hour, your legs go numb. You shift from foot to foot. You count stones in the wall. 37, then 38. Then you realize you counted the same one twice. There's a peculiar rhythm to the stillness. Flicker, sway, breathe, repeat. A fringe detail. Some knights wore their armor even during sleep shifts while on campaign. Not full plate, just the essentials. It meant sleeping upright, or at best curled up like a metal hedgehog. You test the position against the rampart wall and discover it's as uncomfortable as it sounds. At last, your relief arrives, and you shuffle back to the barracks for a short rest. The straw mattress is less scratchy this time. Or maybe you're just too tired to care. You close your eyes and let your body melt into the vague shape of sleep. 2 hours later, you're up again. Not quite rested, not quite awake. This, you're told, is how a knight learns to function under pressure. You suspect it's also how a knight learns to hallucinate that his boots are talking. You attend a lecture on battlefield readiness, led by a man who speaks in a slow, soothing drone that could put fire to sleep. He explains that proper sleep is a weapon. Too little, and you falter. Too much, and you grow soft. You're not sure how to find the balance when your blanket has straw sticking out of it. By midday, you're assigned a nap. It's official. Written into the schedule and everything. You lie on a blanket in the shade of the training yard wall, eyes closed, trying to relax while someone practices shouting in the background. Sleep doesn't come, but still, you rest. Sort of. Historians debate whether knights actually got enough rest to remain battle effective, or whether their lives were a slow parade of exhaustion punctuated by adrenaline. Judging by how your eyelids feel like anvils, you're betting on the latter. Evening arrives with cool air and the smell of stewed onions. You eat slowly, savoring the quiet. Training is done for the day, and now it's up to your body to repair itself. You feel every bruise, every ache, and somehow, that's comforting. It means you're becoming someone else, someone who's earned their armor. Back in the barracks, you crawl into your straw mattress and settle in. You've earned these few hours. No night watch tonight, no drills. Just you, the darkness, and the occasional sneeze from Sir Sneezes. The last thing you hear is the wind rustling the canvas flap of the barracks entrance, and the soft whisper of sleep finally finding you. Your dreams last night were a strange swirl of galloping horses and talking bread. You're not entirely sure what it means, but you wake up with crumbs in your tunic, and that seems metaphorically appropriate. Today is tournament preparation day. Before you get too excited, no. You're not being thrown into the grand arena to impress dukes and dancing ladies. You're going to spend the entire morning polishing armor, adjusting straps, and practicing how not to fall off a horse in front of a crowd. Glamorous. You trudge out into the yard where the instructors are already laying out wooden barriers and canvas pennants. Visuals are everything, one says, squinting at a crooked flag. Even when you're being thrown onto your back like a potato sack. Your first task, gear inspection. Your armor, despite all those fittings, still squeaks when you move. The joints near your elbows pinch. Your helmet has a dent from that time you walked into a doorframe. But the worst part? The polish. You're handed a rough cloth, a small pot of lard mixed with something called boar spit. You don't ask. And you begin to scrub. And scrub. And scrub. Historians still argue whether knights actually polished their own armor, or if that job fell to squires. Today, you're your own squire, and the smell of metal oil will haunt you for the rest of your natural life. You move in small circles, working methodically. Gauntlets first, then the breastplate, then the greaves. It's like brushing a very aggressive, silent pet. The repetitive motion is oddly calming. The yard hums with the sound of polishing, like a very medieval car wash. By midday, you're called to the lists, the narrow fenced training area where mock tournaments are held. Today's event is lance practice. Again. But this time there's an audience. A few nobles, some bored cooks, and a duck that wandered in from the moat. You line up with 3 other trainees. One has his helmet on backward, another is trying to discreetly vomit behind a barrel. You clutch your practice lance and try to look heroic. The flag drops. You spur Tulip into a charge. She responds with a half-hearted canter that says, "I'm doing this under protest." You lower your lance, squint at the target, a shield mounted on a dummy wearing an old tunic, and brace for impact. You hit it. Barely. The lance wobbles. The dummy tilts. You stay upright, which is considered a victory in these parts. Then it's your turn to watch. And that's when you learn the true boredom of tournament prep. For every minute of action, there are 5 minutes of waiting, adjustments, debates about scoring. Someone insists the angle of the lance was unfair. The duck quacks judgmentally. A quirky detail? Some knights used to choreograph parts of their tournament performances. A particularly flamboyant knight once practiced throwing his helmet into the crowd after every victory. It hit a baroness on the head. He stopped after that. Eventually, the instructor calls for swordplay demonstrations. You shuffle back into the yard, muscles aching, armor clanking like a kitchen cupboard. You square off against a trainee known for his dramatic grunts. Every swing of his sword sounds like he's trying out for an opera. You do your best to block without giggling. There are 3 approved moves for today's mock fight: high strike, side sweep, shoulder tap. Anything more exciting earns a scowl from the instructor. You imagine him as a disappointed librarian who happens to carry a warhammer. Historians still debate whether tournaments were true reflections of battlefield skill or just medieval reality TV. There's certainly a performative element: bows, dramatic pauses, colorful surcoats, but also very real bruises. Your forearm is starting to bloom a fresh one as you parry another blow. Eventually, you're dismissed. The duck waddles off. You clank back to the barracks, armor dulling again despite your earlier polish. Dinner tastes vaguely of onions and pride. That night, you lie in your bed, arms sore, brain spinning from all the pageantry. You start to understand that tournaments were less about winning and more about enduring, with grace, with polish, and ideally with all your teeth still in your head. You close your eyes and dream of cheering crowds, flying lances, and a duck in a little helmet. Morning comes with the scent of wet hay and overcooked oats. You've started guessing the weather based on how soggy your boots feel by sunrise. Today, your instructor informs you with a grin that shows too many teeth is Lance Mastery Day. You thought you already did that. You thought the lance and you had reached some sort of mutual understanding. Apparently not. Lances are long, unreasonably long. When held upright, they're taller than the stables. When tilted, they become hazards to low-flying birds. Today's goal? Learn to control one with the grace of a dancer, while riding a beast with strong opinions, through mud. The lesson begins with footwork drills. You don't even get a horse yet, just you, a wooden lance, and the awkward knowledge that you look like a scarecrow trying yoga. You practice holding it balanced under your arm, tip forward, elbow bent just so. The instructor walks by and nudges your elbow with the toe of his boot. Again, he mutters. You realign and try not to think about how many times you've heard that word since becoming a trainee. Historians still debate whether the classic knightly lance grip, the couched position, was born out of utility or sheer stubbornness. It puts tremendous strain on your arm, but when done correctly, delivers devastating impact. When done incorrectly, it delivers you into a pile of cabbages. Next, horse drills. Tulip returns, ears twitching. She remembers you. You mount with slightly more grace this time, only swinging one leg too hard and thwacking her side. She gives you a look that would curdle milk. Now, it's time for precision. Riding slowly, you aim your lance through suspended rings, some as wide as your fist, others barely larger than a coin. You miss most of them. One catches the tip and spins around dramatically before falling into the mud. You sigh. Tulip snorts in agreement. Then comes the canter drill. You're to ride in a wide circle, keeping your lance pointed at a target mounted on a rotating pole. Each time you pass, you're supposed to tap it lightly. Just a tap, nothing flashy. You go too hard on the second loop and knock the entire contraption over. A fringe tidbit. During early tournaments, knights would sometimes accidentally destroy the Quinton target to avoid facing the next challenger. Whether this was tactical genius or a creative excuse for exhaustion is still hotly debated. After lunch, guess what? It's stew again. You resume training in pairs. Lance fencing. Yes, that's a thing. You and a fellow trainee trot past each other on parallel lanes, each trying to graze the other's shoulder pad. It's all in slow motion today, meant to teach balance and awareness. Your lance wobbles like a drunk feather duster. His swings wide and thunks harmlessly into the barrier. Occasionally, someone makes contact. It's a dull sound, like two pumpkins brushing in a cart. No injuries, just pride, slightly bruised. An older knight supervises, his hands behind his back. Don't aim for the chest, he calls. Aim for the space between breath and fear. You're not sure what that means, but it sounds profound, so you nod as if enlightened. You dismount, legs shaking slightly. Your arms feel like rubber. The lance feels heavier than when you started, even though it hasn't changed. You imagine yourself in a real battle, galloping toward an enemy line, lance aimed true. You try to picture it, try to believe it, then you trip over the lance on the ground. Tulip huffs. Training wins down with a bit of theory. You gather around a chalkboard where a diagram of lance angles is being drawn at the speed of moss growth. The instructor uses words like momentum, shock absorption, and velocity translation. You mostly hear blah, oof, and try not to die. By the end of the day, you're back to polishing your weapon. The wood has a few new scratches, a tiny chip near the grip. You rub wax into it carefully, as if smoothing over your own mistakes. Historians still discuss whether knights truly loved their lances, or if it was just expected, a symbolic extension of their honor, their house, their strength. You don't know about all that. You just know that your right arm is going to fall off if you lift this thing one more time. You settle into dinner beside a few others, all equally sore, equally quiet. No one boasts tonight. There are no victories, only small survivals. Tulip is in her stall, munching hay like she's already forgotten you exist. You eat your bread slowly, chew thoughtfully, and try not to fall asleep in the bowl of stew. Later, as you lie on your straw mattress, you realize something. The lance didn't get lighter. You just got stronger. By now, you've accepted that every day begins with something slightly uncomfortable. Today, it's siege warfare drills, which, for the uninitiated, sounds thrilling. Catapults, flaming arrows, daring escapes. But you'll spend the morning pushing a wooden tower uphill while someone shouts about angle of attack and proper wheel rotation. You shuffle out to the practice field where a replica siege tower sits waiting. It's less majestic than you imagined, more splintery. Someone's carved a smiley face into one of the planks, possibly as a cry for help. Your instructor claps his hands. Siege drill number 1. Push, hold, retreat, reset, and again. You eye the tower. It doesn't blink. You sigh. With a few groans and creaks, not just from the wood, you and your fellow trainees lean into the structure. It rolls forward about 4 feet, then stops. You're now very familiar with the back of a trainee named Hugo, who sweats like a waterfall and apologizes constantly. Historians still debate the usefulness of siege drills at this scale. Some argue they were more symbolic than tactical, intended to build endurance and coordination. Others suggest they were just a way to keep restless trainees too tired to cause mischief. You suspect both are true. Once the pushing is over, you move on to scaling. There's a wooden wall with rope ladders. It's about 12 feet high, which doesn't sound like much, until you realize your armor weighs roughly the same as a medium-sized dog, and the ropes were last replaced. Oh, never. You make it halfway up before your foot slips. You dangle, not very heroically, before easing yourself back down. One trainee tries to leap the final foot, misses, and lands with a sound that suggests he's rethinking his life choices. The instructor notes, "Better than yesterday." You try again, this time slower, hand over hand. Breathe, grip, pull. At the top there's not much to see, just the yard, the stables, Tulip staring at nothing in particular. But still there's a small rush of accomplishment, or vertigo. Hard to tell. You climb down, legs wobbly, and gather with the others for tower assault drills. This involves charging up a short ramp, banging a wooden shield against a fake gate, and then retreating before the boiling oil is poured, represented today by a bucket of warm water and an overly enthusiastic squire. You get soaked twice. Lunch follows. More bread, a bit of lentil stew, and a few slices of turnip someone claims were boiled in mead. You're skeptical. The only thing they taste like is boiled disappointment. The afternoon brings catapult practice. You're excited, until you realize your job isn't to fire the thing, it's to load it. Repeatedly. You haul round stones across the field, heaving them into the scoop with a grunt that grows less noble each time. A trainee assigned to the crank mutters a prayer each time he winds the mechanism. You all brace. The arm launches the rock. A few feet. It bounces. Rolls. Hits Tulip's feeding trough. Tulip doesn't flinch. A quirky historical tidbit? Some medieval armies used rotting animal carcasses as siege ammunition, not just stones. These were meant to spread disease, demoralize defenders, and generally ruin everyone's day. You're glad today's practice sticks to harmless boulders. Your hands blister, your back aches, and you begin to understand that siege warfare was 90% grunt work and 10% screaming. There's very little galloping, almost no swordplay, just labor, sweat, and the constant creak of wood on wood. Evening drills are canceled due to a minor injury. Someone tripped over a loose catapult arm and twisted an ankle. You all silently thank him with your eyes. Back in the barracks, you sit quietly, massaging your hands and feet. Someone mentions they found a splinter in their sock. Someone else thinks they swallowed a bug during the ladder climb. The mood is mellow, too tired for jokes, too content to complain. As you lay down, you think of the wall, of climbing, of pushing, of aiming a boulder at the sky and hoping it lands somewhere useful. Siege warfare, it turns out, is slow, clunky, and oddly meditative, like your thoughts as you finally drift off. You wake up to a sound you haven't heard before. Silence. For a moment, you're convinced it's a trick. Maybe everyone left for training without you. Maybe you've slept through your knighthood, and they're carving your name on a wooden bench somewhere. But no, today is something entirely different. Etiquette day. You sit up slowly, more confused than sore. Instead of your usual training tunic, a folded doublet has been placed at the foot of your straw mattress. It smells of lavender and responsibility. You're herded into the hall, where the tables have been cleared and replaced with low stools, a lectern, and several confused-looking candles. Standing before you is Sir Alaric, an older knight whose beard is braided, and who carries himself with the dignity of a man who's never tripped over his own sword. He introduces today's training, courtly behavior. You glance around, expecting at least one person to object. No one does. Everyone's too stunned. Your first lesson? How to bow. Not the kind of bow you perform to dodge an axe, but the slow, deliberate kind that involves back alignment, neck angle, and eye contact. You try it. You feel like a collapsing scarecrow. Sir Alaric corrects your form. Too much knee. Too little grace. You try again. The candle flickers in what you're sure is disapproval. Historians still debate how much etiquette training knights actually received versus how much they were expected to pick up on the fly. Some accounts suggest weeks of instruction. Others claim it was entirely learned through humiliating trial and error in front of nobility. Today, you're somewhere in between. Next comes seating protocol. There's a pretend feast set up with wooden platters and empty goblets. You're told exactly how to sit. Hands on the table, but not your elbows. Napkin across your lap, but not tied around your neck. When the instructor mentions fork, half the room looks puzzled. A quirky tidbit. Forks weren't always common in medieval Europe. In some circles, they were considered suspiciously fancy. One noblewoman was reportedly chastised for using one to eat fruit. The bishop called it excessive. You stare at your goblet and wonder how excessive it would be to drink directly from the pitcher. You move on to conversation practice. Yes, conversation. You're paired with another trainee and given a scenario. You are attending a noble banquet after a minor skirmish. Topics allowed include hawking, wine, and weather. Not allowed. Injury stories, bodily functions, and how many lice you found in your tunic last week. You attempt a comment about cloud formations. Your partner nods politely, responds with a haiku about wind, and somehow turns it into a debate about pigeon training. You both get partial credit. Sir Alaric walks between pairs, nodding, correcting posture, occasionally raising one eyebrow so sharply it could cut parchment. He reminds you that a knight must not only fight, but also impress, influence, and inspire. Wars are won in halls as well as fields, he says, voice soft but firm. You break for lunch and are told this is also part of the lesson. The stew is the same, but now you must eat it with quiet dignity. No slurping, no licking fingers, no tipping the bowl back like a horn of ale. You comply. You eat like someone's watching, because Sir Alaric is. He always is. Afterward, there's a scroll reading session. You're handed a parchment with a flowery greeting from a duchess. Your job? Read it aloud, respond appropriately, and don't sound like you're issuing a tax threat. You do your best. My lady, you begin. Your generosity flows like a... You pause. Very generous thing. The instructor nods slowly. Adequate. Finally, the last activity of the day. Dancing. Yes, dancing. A court musician strikes up a gentle tune on a rebec. You're paired again, this time with a squire wearing the expression of a trapped squirrel. Together you attempt to follow the steps. Left, right, turn, bow, retreat. You step on his foot. He steps on yours. Somehow it's a draw. Historians still argue whether knights actually danced or if this was simply expected of higher-ranking lords. Either way, the training was real enough. Nobles took pride in their poise, and nothing ruins poise like a twisted ankle mid-waltz. As the sun sets, you file out into the cool air. You're bruised in new ways today, not on the arms or legs, but somewhere in your dignity. And yet, there's something oddly satisfying about remembering which side to wear your cloak pin on at dinner. You've spent weeks learning how to fight. Today you learned how to stand still without looking like a barn door. That, too, is part of being a knight. The morning fog is thicker than usual, draped across the yard like an unwashed curtain. Today is a big day, your knighthood exam, or rather, a day of multiple minor humiliations dressed up as an assessment of readiness. It's not one grand test with a trumpet fanfare and a golden scroll. It's a series of small trials designed to ensure you're not a complete disaster in a helmet. You're told nothing in advance. That's part of the point. You line up with the others in the yard. The instructors wear their serious faces, the ones they usually save for bad weather and worse stew. One steps forward and declares the first trial. Armor assembly. Solo. Under time pressure. A bucket is flipped over to reveal a small hourglass. You kneel beside your scattered armor pieces, heart thudding. You reach for your greaves, almost grab the left for the right leg, switch mid-motion and fumble the straps. Someone nearby curses as their vambrace clatters into the dirt. You keep your breathing slow. Buckle here, tie there. You remember the old tailor's advice. Tight enough to hold, loose enough to breathe. You're mostly breathing. That's progress. Historians still argue whether knights regularly dressed themselves, especially in battle. Some claim squires did most of the work. Others suggest knights trained obsessively for emergencies. Today's test leans toward the latter. You finish with seconds to spare. Your helmet's a little crooked, but you can see. Mostly. Next trial. Weapon recognition. You're shown a row of medieval armaments, some familiar, some questionable. A flail with a ridiculously long chain. A warhammer that looks more like a bread mallet. A curved dagger with a handle shaped like a goat. Name them, then choose one. You rattle off their names. Longsword, mace, rondel dagger, partisan, and, possibly a ceremonial hairbrush disguised as a weapon. You pick the longsword. It's not glamorous, but it listens to you. The instructor nods. Now demonstrate your guard stances, all 6. You run through them. High guard, low guard, ox, plow, fool, roof. You mix up 2 halfway through and try to style it out as improvisation. The instructor makes a small note. Probably creative flair, a quirky tidbit. The fool stance, where the sword hangs low and limp, wasn't just poorly named. It was a deceptive position meant to bait overconfident opponents. Of course, if you used it poorly, you ended up looking like an actual fool. You try not to do that. The third trial is a combat simulation. You face off against a slightly bored instructor with a blunted blade and a bruised ego from last week's latrine inspection. He lunges, you parry, he swings again, you dodge, barely. It's not elegant. There's no choreography. Just quick, awkward movements and the very real understanding that you are now expected to hold your own. You land a clean tap on his shoulder. He grunts. Somewhere a pigeon claps. The fourth trial is the verbal oath. You're led to the chapel. It smells of old stone and beeswax. A knight reads the code aloud. Loyalty, courage, mercy, discipline. You repeat each line after him, voice steady, trying not to mispronounce chivalric. You almost do. You recover with a meaningful pause. Dramatic, not uncertain. Historians debate the sincerity of these oaths. Were they heartfelt commitments or formalities recited with fingers crossed behind one's cloak? Maybe both. But standing there, you feel the weight of it, not just the armor but the words. You may not be a full knight yet, but you're wearing the idea of one. Back outside, a final challenge awaits. You are to mount your horse, fully armored, and ride across the yard without falling, swaying, or yelling something embarrassing. Tulip waits, looking thoroughly unimpressed. You approach with care. You step into the stirrup, swing your leg, and for the first time in your training, you land perfectly. You sit tall. The instructors murmur. One of them even nods. You ride a slow loop. Tulip behaves. You dismount without incident. You bow. That's it. You're done. Well, nearly. There's no sword-tapping ceremony today, no dramatic pronouncements, just a quiet moment where your instructor claps a hand to your shoulder and says, "You didn't embarrass us." High praise by medieval standards. Dinner that night is not special, but it tastes better somehow. The bread is still dense, the stew still mysterious. But you eat like someone who's passed something important. You lie down, fully exhausted, not just physically, but deeply, soul-tired, bone-tired, and proud. Tomorrow more training will come. But tonight, you rest like a knight in waiting. You sleep a little deeper after passing your exam. There's a new kind of ache in your bones, less from impact, more from the gentle weight of progress. But just when you thought your days might now shift toward nobler, cleaner pursuits, reality reminds you, a knight still has to heal. Today is about injuries, tending them, enduring them, and pretending you don't mind the smell of onion poultices. You wake to find the barracks unusually quiet. Half the trainees are limping. One is hopping. Another is wrapped in a blanket, muttering softly about ladders. A squire enters with a wooden crate of bandages and a determined look. It's time for field healing practice. You're ushered into the infirmary, which is really just a curtained-off corner of the hall that smells like boiled herbs and regret. A healer, a stern woman with sleeves rolled to her elbows, walks you through the basics. Knights bleed, knights bruise, knights don't faint, she says. You try not to faint. She shows you how to wrap a wound, tight, but not too tight, always starting below the cut and spiraling upward. You practice on a fellow trainee who winces dramatically every time you brush his arm. You're pretty sure he just wants sympathy. You give him a light pat and an even tighter wrap. Historians still debate the effectiveness of medieval field medicine. Some claim knights had access to excellent battlefield care for the time, ointments, clean tools, trained staff. Others suggest healing was more luck and prayer than science. Judging by the size of the leeches on the shelf beside you, you suspect the truth lies somewhere in the middle. Next comes salves and poultices. You're handed a bowl of something green and lumpy. Crushed plantain leaves, goose fat, and a pinch of ash, the healer says, as if reading off a stew recipe. You smear it on a fake cut drawn across a wax dummy. It smells like disappointment and cooked salad. A quirky tidbit. One popular remedy for infected wounds was a mix of wine, garlic, and ox bile. The wine killed some bacteria, the garlic helped with inflammation, and the bile, well, it probably just made the patient lie very still out of fear. The next exercise is splinting. Your partner holds out a fake broken wrist. You grab 2 wooden slats, some linen, and a worried look. Wrap, secure, support. You manage a decent job, though the hand is now bent at a permanent thumbs up. Maybe he'll appreciate the optimism. After lunch, surprise, more barley, you're treated to a live demonstration. A real knight, grizzled and cheerful, limps into the room with a bruised knee and a tale about a misbehaving goat. Sometimes you get injured just trying to mount your steed in the rain, he says. Everyone nods as if this is deeply profound. He removes his greave, revealing a swollen joint. The healer applies a poultice and a wrap while explaining each step. See? Simple. Until it's not. She pauses. And when in doubt, don't poke it. You nod earnestly, as if "don't poke it" is new and revolutionary wisdom. The afternoon is spent in restorative posture training, which sounds relaxing until you realize it means holding static stances to build stamina without strain. You stand in guard for 10 minutes without moving. Your arms start to tremble. Your legs forget how to be legs. You sweat silently. Your body is your first armor, the instructor says. And like armor, if not maintained, it rusts. There's a quiet dignity in this form of training. Not flashy, not exciting, just small acts of resilience. You stretch your fingers. You breathe through sore ribs. You learn how to feel when something's wrong, before it becomes serious. Dinner comes with a medicinal tea. Bitter, grassy, slightly warm. You drink it anyway. Later that night, a fellow trainee with a swollen eye shares his secret recipe for bruise butter. A mix of beeswax, rosemary, and whatever smells least like feet. You thank him and apply it to your shoulder just in case. As you lie back on your straw mattress, you think about all the tiny, invisible battles that knights fight. Not just with blades, but with pain, with fatigue, with healing. To endure is to earn. You close your eyes, the smell of herbs still lingering on your skin, and you rest, knowing even knights need patching up. You wake up to the sound of metal on metal. Not swords clashing, just armor being cleaned. Again. You roll over, stare at the ceiling beams for a moment, and sigh. Today is armor maintenance day. No horses, no duels. Just you, a rag, and the metallic equivalent of laundry. You shuffle out into the courtyard where buckets of water, lumps of charcoal, and small tubs of animal fat are already laid out. Each trainee is assigned a corner of the yard, along with their armor laid out in pieces like an elaborate jigsaw puzzle of discomfort. Your instructor claps once. A knight who neglects his armor might as well walk into battle naked, he says. Everyone chuckles, mostly because the image is funny, and also because it's true. You begin with the greaves, shin guards. You scrape off the dried mud from yesterday's mock charge, then wipe them down with a damp cloth. After that, a light rub with tallow to prevent rust. The smell is specific, like bacon, regret, and old nails. Historians still argue whether knights did this work themselves or if it was mostly up to squires. But either way, training included learning how to care for your gear. Armor was expensive. Losing it to rust or neglect was both costly and embarrassing. You move to the breastplate next, carefully working around the edges where the rivets catch grime. It's slow, repetitive work. Wipe, rub, buff. It squeaks with protest, but eventually gleams. In the soft light of the morning, the reflection almost looks impressive. Almost. A quirky tidbit. Some knights carved tiny symbols or prayers into the inside of their armor. Things only they would see. Not for vanity, but for courage. You find yourself tracing the inside of your own cuirass. You consider etching a symbol, maybe a tiny tulip, in honor of your horse. Maybe not. Around you, others are having similar moments of silent meditation. There's no yelling today, no swordplay, just the sounds of quiet labor, brushing, scraping, the occasional muttered curse when someone nicks a finger on a rough edge. Next comes the helmet. You forgot how badly it smelled. Like boiled wool and fear. You wipe down the inside with a vinegar-soaked rag, then let it air. You're briefly tempted to stuff it with rosemary leaves. Just for morale. You're assigned to oil the chainmail next. The most tedious part. Link by link, you rub a small amount of oil in, checking for breaks or warping. It's like grooming a porcupine that's very bad at conversation. Chainmail is like friendship, your instructor says nearby. Strong only when every link is cared for. You're not sure if that's profound or just a weird way of making you keep working. Either way, you nod respectfully. After a light lunch, more barley with a suspiciously green slice of cheese, you move into armor repair drills. Someone brings out a chest of damaged pieces, dented pauldrons, snapped straps, misaligned gauntlets. You're given tools, pliers, awls, spare rivets, and told to make it work. You bend a buckle back into shape. You replace a leather thong on a gorget. You even manage to tighten a loose elbow joint on a vambrace. It feels satisfying, not heroic, not glorious, but real, like tending to a well-used saddle or trimming the edges of a favorite cloak. Historians still debate how much repair knights could manage themselves versus relying on smiths. But many knights learned basic fixes, especially those who couldn't afford to lose a fight to a squeaky hinge. Before sunset, you line up in full armor for final inspection. The instructor walks down the row, running fingers across polished surfaces, nodding occasionally. He stops in front of you, taps your chest plate with a knuckle, and grunts. It might be approval. It might be a reminder to check the straps again. You decide to take it as a win. As the evening cools, you sit by the fire pit in your tunic, hands still smelling of iron and oil. You rub your thumb along a new nick in your gauntlet, proof that you're training, learning, improving. Dinner is bread again, but it crunches less than usual. You head to bed late, your armor stacked carefully beside your mattress. There's a strange peace in knowing you cared for it, that you didn't just wear it, but preserved it. Knighthood isn't just about striking, it's about sustaining. You fall asleep thinking of links, straps, and quiet polish. This morning begins not with drills, not with porridge, but with something softer. Archery practice. You expected the usual brutality, weights, mud, maybe a sprint involving buckets. Instead, you find yourself standing in a quiet clearing behind the keep, surrounded by trees and silence. The targets have been set up at intervals, painted in faded colors. A few already show signs of abuse. Arrows sticking out at odd angles, one sagging like it's had a long week. A bow is placed in your hand. Not a crossbow, just a classic longbow, tall as your shoulder, its curve like a question mark waiting to be answered. You test the string. It hums faintly, like it knows something you don't. Draw, hold, release, your instructor says, barely louder than the breeze. You knock your first arrow and try to follow his rhythm. The bow resists. Your fingers tremble. The arrow sails wide, very wide, possibly into another county. He doesn't scold. He just nods. Again. And so, you begin the repetition. Draw, hold, release, draw, hold, release. It's not flashy, it's not loud, but slowly, your body begins to adjust. Your shoulders remember how to anchor. Your breath begins to sync with the pull. The forest becomes part of the silence. Historians still debate how much emphasis knights placed on archery, since archers were often of lower rank. Yet training with a bow was not uncommon, especially for hunting, signaling, and in some cases, backup offense. A knight needed to be adaptable, and arrows were as ancient as war itself. A quirky tidbit? Some knights practice clout shooting, firing arrows high into the air to land near a distant target. Not for accuracy, but for feel. It was archery as meditation. You try it, releasing an arrow into the blue, watching it arc slowly down to the earth like a falling leaf. It misses by several feet, but you feel strangely calm. Later in the day, you switch to moving targets. A wooden frame rolls past, pulled by two exhausted squires. The target bobs and weaves, and your arrow hits the wheel instead of the center. The instructor snorts. Not bad. You've slowed the enemy's cart. You laugh for once. There's a joy in this training. Archery is not about brute strength or blinding speed. It's about timing, focus, patience. All things you've begun to learn in other ways, under louder conditions. Here, they whisper back to you. Midday sun filters through the trees. Shadows dance on the forest floor. You take a break, sitting under an oak tree. Another trainee offers you dried apple slices. You trade for half a biscuit. There's quiet chewing. No one speaks. You return to the line, this time aiming for consistency rather than flair. Every shot doesn't need to hit the center. It needs to land well. A clean shot, a smooth release, the kind of thing you don't notice until it's gone. Your instructor pauses behind you. Let the bow do the work, he murmurs. You just get out of its way. That somehow makes more sense than anything else you've heard all week. By evening, your fingers are sore, your back stiff, but you found a rhythm. Arrows hit closer to the target now. One lands square in the yellow ring. You don't react. Neither does your instructor. That's part of the lesson. Dinner is venison stew, a rare treat. Rumor says it's from a successful hunt by one of the older knights. You smile into your bowl. Maybe one day your arrow will be behind a meal like this. That night, lying in bed, you imagine the pull of the bowstring, the feel of tension, the breath before the release, the hush of flight. You don't dream of battle tonight. You dream of quiet aim. The morning brings with it a hushed reverence. Even the horses seem quieter. There's no clang of swords, no barked orders, only the soft tolling of the chapel bell and the slow rustle of woolen robes. Today is dedicated to spiritual preparation. You're ushered into the chapel, where filtered sunlight spills through high, narrow windows. The air smells of melted tallow and damp stone. Candles flicker at the altar, their flames barely disturbed by the creak of benches as the trainees file in. A priest steps forward not in armor, but in a simple robe. His voice is calm, soft, worn smooth by years of repetition. A knight defends more than land, he begins. He defends the soul, his and others. You sit in silence, unsure what to do with your hands. They're used to gripping weapons, not rosaries. The priest teaches you a short prayer, a blessing for courage, another for protection, and a longer one for mercy. He explains that knights often prayed before battle, not just for victory, but for restraint, for clarity, for the strength to make the right decision when the right decision felt anything but easy. Historians still debate how devout most knights truly were. Some saw the rituals as symbolic, part of their code but not deeply personal. Others took them to heart, viewing each fight as a test of divine purpose. The chapel training doesn't demand belief, but it teaches respect and reflection. You kneel at the altar, your knees pressing into the worn stone. You whisper the blessing under your breath, just loud enough for yourself to hear. It doesn't feel dramatic. It feels quiet, important in a way that's hard to explain. After the service, you're led outside to the garden behind the chapel. There, you're given the task of writing your own vow, a personal code, something beyond the standard oaths. You're handed a small parchment, ink, and a feather quill that refuses to cooperate. You sit beneath a tree, chewing your lip, trying to sound noble without sounding ridiculous. Around you, others scribble. A few cross things out dramatically. One sighs and starts over for the third time. You finally settle on a few lines. They're simple, honest, something about protecting those who can't fight, about speaking the truth, about never turning away from a hard road. You fold the parchment. No one else will read it. That's not the point. A quirky detail? Some knights would sew their personal vows into the lining of their tunics, just over the heart. Not visible, but always close. A quiet reminder under the weight of steel. Later in the day, you return to the chapel for shield training, but not the physical kind. Symbolic shield design. You're given a wooden disc and a pot of paint. The instructor explains that a knight's shield bore more than colors. It bore values, stories, lineage, or sometimes just a really cool animal. You consider your options. A lion feels too proud, a boar too aggressive, a squirrel too, well, squirrel. You settle on a tree, steady, rooted. You paint it in green and brown, as best as your shaky hand allows. It's lopsided, but you like it. The final exercise of the day is called the Vigil Walk. You're sent alone around the outer wall of the keep, without weapons or armor, just you and the wind. It's meant to simulate the calm before a campaign, a time to think, to let your thoughts settle before steel takes over. The stones crunch beneath your boots. The fields stretch out in all directions. The sky is streaked with the last light of day. You walk slowly, remembering each lesson, each bruise, each mistake. You recall the first time you held a sword, the first time Tulip dragged you into the mud, the first time you were praised for something other than surviving. You realize somewhere along this quiet path that you don't feel like a trainee anymore. You feel like someone who can carry a sword without needing to use it. Dinner is simple, no talking. Just bread, broth, and silence. It feels right. You fall asleep under your cloak tonight, not on the mattress, but by the hearth.
your vow tucked into your belt, your painted shield drying by the wall. You rest deeply, your breath slow, and for the first time, you don't dream of battles, you dream of peace.
The final morning of your training arrives not with a bang, nor a bell, but with the soft shuffle of boots on stone and a note of quiet understanding in the air. Today is not for fighting, not for polishing, not even for praying. Today is about what comes after. The instructor calls you together, not in rows or columns, but in a loose circle beneath the old tree near the practice field, the same one that shaded countless bruised knees and whispered grumbles over the weeks. He doesn't bark commands. He simply looks at you all, one by one, and says, "Let's walk." And so you do. Out beyond the castle gates, past the stables, beyond even the archery field, lies a small winding trail that skirts the woods. You take it in silence. The others stay close, but not crowded. A flock of birds lifts into the sky as you pass. One of them drops something on a squire's shoulder. The squire sighs. No one laughs, but smiles flicker. You reach a low hill. On top of it, overlooking the fields and meadows and far-off outlines of villages, the instructor finally speaks again. "There will be days," he says, "when you'll miss this. The routine, the repetition, the simplicity. You don't believe him now, but you will." He explains what happens when the armor is stored away, when the wars are over, when age or injury turns the sword into a cane, and the training yard into a place for stories, not sweat. You listen quietly as he speaks of retirement, not just of the body, but of the identity. When you're no longer a trainee or a knight, but just someone. Honor doesn't retire, he says, but sometimes your knees will. Historians still argue about what most knights did after their service. Some became landlords, others clergymen. Some trained the next generation. A few wandered, lost without the clarity of duty. A few found peace in their gardens. One built birdhouses, apparently. You're led back to the keep for one final ritual. You change out of your training tunic, not into armor, but into a simple robe, undyed wool, slightly scratchy. It's ceremonial, they say. It strips you of symbols. You enter the final moment as yourself. One by one, you and the others are called forward. There's no applause, no feast, just a steady hand on your shoulder and a quiet statement. You have trained with discipline, served with patience, and walked the long road. Now you are ready. A soft cloth is laid over your shoulders, a token of completion, woven with a single stripe of color. Yours is green, like the tree you painted. No one tells you what comes next. That's the point. You return to the barracks, which now feels too small, too temporary. You begin packing your things, cloak, boots, your shield with its crooked tree. You find the note you wrote days ago folded neatly where you left it. You tuck it into your belt again, without opening it. Before leaving, you stop by Tulip's stall. She's chewing something indeterminable and refuses eye contact. Typical. You scratch her behind the ear anyway. Dinner that night is shared around a fire, under the open sky. There's laughter, even song, off-key, slightly tired, but warm. You say little. You just watch the flames and feel the weight of stillness after long effort. And then comes sleep. One last time on the straw mattress. You lie on your back, arms folded over your chest, the faint ache of training still pulsing gently in your muscles. But now, it feels earned. Familiar. Like the kind of pain that teaches rather than torments. The night deepens, and your breath begins to slow. You feel the blanket rise and fall with each inhale. The warmth pooling at your shoulders, the air cooling softly against your cheeks. Outside, a breeze picks up, nudging through cracks in the wooden shutters. You listen to it as though it carries stories from other keeps, other nights just like this one. You shift slightly, letting your body sink a little deeper into the mattress, the straw rustling beneath you like a whisper. Every muscle, once held so tightly, now releases its grip. Your hands grow heavy, your shoulders soften, even your jaw loosens. The day, the training, the stories, they all begin to fade at the edges. You picture the old training yard, now empty and quiet, dust settling over the footprints and scuffs left behind. The dummies stand still, the ropes sway gently, and the fire pit glows with the memory of laughter. You are no longer part of the drill. You are part of the place. And as your thoughts drift like smoke through a chimney, you allow yourself this peace. You earned it. Every clumsy fall, every aching dawn, every silent oath whispered into your helmet, they've brought you here, to rest, to stillness, to sleep. Good night, night. End of script. Sweet dreams.